Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I know this is going to be a difficult quarter for everybody with a lot of adjustments, and so I'm very happy that we will all be in this together, so to speak. The course mechanics and the logistics for how to deal with this course as a remote learning experience are going to be posted in a different document. Those will outline the basic ways the course will work, how sections will work, and the ways in which materials will be reviewed. What I do want is for these particular presentations to just be basically introductions to the texts and the kinds of materials we're working with. There are podcasts that are posted as well. These are from 2018. The discussions of the texts are mainly the same, though in some cases my ideas may have changed a little bit, but I've posted those for a couple of reasons. First, if for some reason I'm not able to put all of these together because I get ill, at least then you have a full run of these class materials. Second, because these are being posted without any student engagement, those other ones can give you a sense of some of the questions that students in the class have asked before. So those are posted on Canvas as well, and you can feel free to access them as you wish. Now, when I introduce Humanities 2, what I tend to do is to speak about why it is that I teach this class. So I'm Professor Watts, I'm the chair of the history department, and I'm a Roman and Byzantine historian. I'm particularly interested in aspects of change and how changes are talked about and discussed across Roman history and across medieval history. Now, as you know, this is the section of the Revel Humanities sequence that looks at the cultural development of Europe and the Mediterranean from the Roman Empire until the Middle Ages. And I have to say that when I was first arriving at UCSC's campus and I was asked to teach this class, I was a little skeptical about whether or not this was something that I wanted to take on. This is because, almost constitutionally, I believe that it's very good for undergraduates to choose their courses and take only the classes that he or she chooses to take. I went to Brown, which is a university that really prized this, and I enjoyed that freedom as an undergraduate. And I had my doubts about how much benefit can come from acquired courses and how much fun students can have taking them. But what particularly appealed to me about this course is the amount of freedom that instructors have to shape the course around the texts and themes that interest them and hopefully interest their students as well. So as a Roman historian, it's probably no surprise that I love this material. I particularly love working on Roman and medieval materials. And so this is very exciting stuff for me. And I will also say, as a result of teaching in Hume, and this is, I think, my 6th or 7th year teaching in Hume, my own research has really expanded a lot, and I've come to work much more extensively on the Middle Ages, in large part because of this class. Now, the thing that is particularly daunting about Humanities 2 is that the course we're looking at covers an immense span of time, more than 1,500 years. And this is a huge span of time during which one sees not only the rise of an empire that spanned the Mediterranean, but also the emergence of Christianity, the religion that will dominate Western culture for centuries to come, and the end of that empire as well. And that makes it very hard to wrap your mind around it. I know many of you have very little background in Roman history. That's completely understandable. It's completely expected. But I think one thing that allows us to maybe get our minds around this massive span of time is the one feature that kind of unifies it. Because fundamentally, when you're looking at 1,500 years of history, you're looking at a story of people, the people who lived through that immense stretch of time. In a lot of cases, and I know this is true from my children among other people, when Roman history, Byzantine history, and medieval history is presented in high schools, it's presented very, very quickly. It's not part of the AP Euro curriculum, for example. This comes up maybe in 6th grade, and maybe again, if you're lucky, in a world history course in high school. And you move through it very, very quickly. And so you maybe spend a week or two looking at this 1,500 year span. And that makes 1,500 years seem like nothing. And there's a real tendency for this to be understandable, because it's very hard to wrap your mind around 1500 years. It's also very hard to wrap your mind around materials from the past that you didn't live through and that you didn't experience. And so when I teach history, one of the things that I'm particularly interested in having students understand is there's a difference between what you remember and what you learn about. When you remember something, like you remember the 2016 election or you remember the presidency of Barack Obama, you can understand the pace at which those events developed, the pace at which things unfolded. But when you learn about it, you have to imagine this. And when you are imagining the past seems just as real, regardless of how close or far from you it is. And so the challenge in remembering something or understanding something about Roman history is figuring out the pacing of it. And so in high school, what you will see is a week where you will get the beginning of the Roman Republic, the fall of the Roman Republic with Julius Caesar. And this is a great contemporaneous picture of Julius Caesar. And then maybe the next day you move almost 400 years in the future and you get the Emperor Constantine. 400 years is an immense amount of time. Incredible. And yet, at the same time, the amount of time you spent thinking about that 400 years influences how much you understand that extent of time to be real. And so the difference between Caesar and Constantine is the same as the difference between the pilgrims and us. And yet we understand that the pilgrims seem really distant from 2020. But if you lived in the time of Constantine, Julius Caesar would be just as distant. Now, if anything, people move through the Middle Ages even faster. So the Middle Ages, in some cases, people see the beginning of the Middle Ages as beginning with the Emperor Charlemagne around 800. Some people even begin it earlier, in the 5th century, with Attila the Hun. But you can move from Attila the Hun to the end of the Middle Ages, which people put somewhere between 1453 and 1492. You can, again, do that in a week, and a lot of high school classes do that. And so in those contexts, we don't really see much difference between Charlemagne and the Crusades and the people attacking the city of Constantinople with cannons in the 15th century. It's all the Middle Ages. But then when we add in the way the Middle Ages is sometimes thought about, of course, we get something like this. The idea of the Middle Ages as this kind of weird thing that is kind of comical. And so, is the Middle Ages just a flesh wound? Well, many of us were first exposed to the Middle Ages in this way, at least of my generation. It's Monty Python and the Holy Grail, that's the Middle Ages. But what escapes us when we do these sorts of things, when we speed through these sorts of things, is a sense of perspective. It's important to keep in mind a day in the Roman Empire and a day in the Middle Ages still lasted 24 hours. And it moved at exactly the same pace that it does now. And so the big events that we see featured in high school history books occurred about as often in Rome as they do today, which is to say, not very often at all. We're presently living through one of these big events. This is one of the things that you will tell your children about. You will try to explain it to them, and hopefully they won't understand it, because this is so exceptional that we probably will not see the like of it again in our lifetimes. But if we were looking at a high school history class in the year 4000 and they were talking about the early 2000s, this would be an event that comes up, and it might come up literally the next sentence after September 11th, which happened 20 years ago. Most Romans spent most of their time, just like we do, dealing with boring and mundane things. And these things never make it into a textbook. It's quite likely the 20 years between September 11th and the COVID-19 experience will, in a future textbook, basically be blended together. And those 20 years just won't really be talked about, because textbooks focus on those big events. But lives are changed by those big events, but they aren't dominated by them. Most of life is not dealing with a big event. Most of life is dealing with mundane realities. And that means that most of life for Romans, as for us, is concerned with things like what do we have for dinner, or what are we going to do tonight, or does that person down the street, are they interested in me? Can I maybe fall in love with them? Is this person my friend or not? And even how to beat the traffic. And how to beat the traffic is one of those uniform human experiences. The Romans went through this just like we do. Romans were not that different from us in many of these ways. And Roman history moved in real time, just like it does for us. There's no fast forward button. A minute is still a minute, an hour is still an hour, a day is still a day. And a lot of that time is spent doing mundane things that never make their way into a history book. And this is important to consider because much of the period we're talking about in this class is characterized by a fundamental stability. These crises that occur don't shape the very structure of that society. This is because Rome, which later became the Byzantine Empire, is incredibly stable. So by the time we conclude this class in the 15th century, there will be people in the city of Constantinople who are living in houses that are more than 1,000 years old. There will be monuments that are 1,500 years old that are still being used throughout the Mediterranean. And the rhythms of the countryside are even more enduring than what's going on in these cities. And so one of the challenges that we have from this great historical distance is to slow down our rush through the ancient and medieval worlds. And when we do this, we see something that's pretty incredible. We see a human experience that's filled with emotions, ambitions, and strikingly recognizable conflicts. So how do we slow down? How do we get into this world? Well, literature offers us the best way we have to get access to all of this stuff. Because literature is something that tries to recapture or describe the pace of the ordinary and describe the concerns of regular people and the concerns of individuals as they go through their day in real time. So I realize that many of you have already had a quarter to experience the ancient world through its literature. Much of this is probably not new to you then. But I do firmly believe that there's a skill to be able to get the most out of this ancient literature. And what I want to do in this class is to help you develop that skill. Develop the skill that you need to become familiar with how ancient literature works. And so when I designed this class, what I set out to do was to make the class make sense by building it around one particular type of ancient literature, biographies. Now, biographies are a very popular literary form, both now and in antiquity. But biographies worked slightly different in antiquity than they did today. So when we think of a biography now, what we think about is a biography is something that's supposed to be true. It's supposed to be a story of somebody's life. And when you're writing a biography, and I have written one biography, the challenge you have as a modern biographer is you have to figure out what are all of those things that you put together in a particular package. What is the story of this person's life in a way that's both true to their experiences and also tells you something about who those people were and what it is they were trying to do. So a modern biographer can't just make stuff up. We can't say, in my biography of Hypatia, I can't say that Hypatia invented the heliocentric universe. She didn't. It's not true. And that constrains what you can do with these biographies. You can only really talk about what's true. And if it becomes clear that a biographer is making things up, the biography is rendered into a work of fiction. It isn't a biography anymore. But authors in the ancient world felt differently. Authors in the ancient and medieval world distinguished between writing a biography of a person and writing a history of the time in which the person lived. A history is supposed to be true. It's supposed to describe events that actually happened. It's supposed to do it in a way that explains more or less why they happened, but the author can't make things up. If they do that, they're writing a novel. They're not writing a history. But a history is fundamentally supposed to be about events, and events in the order that they happen more or less, with an explanation for why they happened and why they happened in that particular way. A biography is not supposed to be that way in antiquity. And so what I have here is a quote that probably over the course of this quarter is going to get drilled into your mind. This comes from Plutarch's Life of Alexander the Great, one of the first texts you're going to read in the class. And what Plutarch says is, it must be understood that my design is not to write histories, but lives. In Greek, the word for lives is bioi, or biography. And the most glorious exploits do not always furnish us with the clearest discoveries of virtue or vice in men. Sometimes a matter of less importance, an expression or a jest, informs us better of their characters and inclinations than the most famous sieges, the greatest armaments, or the bloodiest battles of all time. And therefore, as portrait painters are more exact in the lines and features of the face in which the character is seen than in the other parts of the body, so must I be allowed to give my more particular attention to the marks and indications of the souls of men. And while I endeavor by these to portray their lives, I may be free to leave more weighty matters and great battles to be treated by others. So this is the clearest summary of what a biography does in antiquity. It's a work designed to tell you about the character of the person. And so if the person is terrible, the biography describes the particular ways in which that person is terrible. If he's admirable, the biography tells you why he's admirable and what you can learn from it. But in the end, the text is about a person and a human experience. And so these texts are not just descriptive. They're actually designed to convince you that the author is describing the person correctly. They're put together so that you can understand the life of their subject in precisely the way the author wants you to. These texts are making an argument. And so what that means is the argument, as Plutarch says at the beginning of this passage, the argument is about whether someone is virtuous or vicious. And the materials that will be used and the things that are focused on are the materials that best make that case. And so what Plutarch is doing is he is making an argument that he understands who this character is, he understands what they are about, and he's giving you evidence to support that argument that he's making. And so in this class, what we're going to do is we're going to focus upon the lives of ancient and medieval people as they're presented by ancient and medieval authors. The lives of all of these people are notable and distinct. The texts describing them, though, are written by authors who share similar ideas about the characteristics that separated an exceptional individual from ordinary people. And so what the course is going to do is use ancient biographies to reconstruct the lives of prominent Romans, Byzantines, and people in the medieval West. But at the same time, what we're going to do is use these texts to understand the views of the people who wrote ancient biographies. We'll see the kinds of issues that concerned them, the actions that they thought were important, and the conduct that they found to be disreputable or despicable. So the lectures that will proceed in this particular way, like we've done so far today, will include some discussion of the techniques the ancient biographer and the medieval biographer uses, but most of the assigned readings will be comprised of biographical texts from the Roman, Byzantine, and medieval worlds. I'm sure that you will have seen the syllabus. We will talk about the syllabus a little bit more in the document that outlines how the course functions. But basically, the idea for the course is it has 4 sections. The first section looks at Roman political biography and the ways in which biographies were used to both attack and support political personalities. And so we'll work through some of the most famous biographies of all time. The works of Suetonius and Plutarch, the first millennium's gold standard as biographers go. And we'll look at some of the most famous Greeks, like Alexander the Great, and Romans, like Julius Caesar, as well as some of the most infamous. So you get to read about Caligula as well. And then you will have a paper at the end of that. In the second section of the course, we'll consider religious biographies written in the Roman Empire and how the biographical form was transformed to describe a holy person. We will look at both pagan biographies and Christian biographies. But this is a section that is going to allow us to see most clearly how biographies can be used as persuasive texts. Because a lot of these religious texts were written either to convince Romans that a person was holy, as in the case of the Christian Gospels, or to show that somebody who claimed he was holy actually was not. And this is what you'll see in Lucian's Life of Alexander the False Prophet. The third section of the class looks at the Christian Roman Empire and how Christian authors living in it adapted Roman biographical literature to do new things in this new context. And so we'll look at the literary presentation of the ideal Christian emperor, the Emperor Constantine. And we will also look at the ways that Christian philosophy is presented, particularly through the works of St. Augustine. The final section of the course looks at the Western, medieval, and Byzantine adaptations of these Roman and Christian models. And so there we will see how the Roman political and the Roman religious and the Christian Roman political and religious come together and are worked with as this Roman world changes into something that is medieval and not particularly Roman anymore. Now, my expectations for you are pretty straightforward. But what I will say is, of those expectations, the one thing that is really important in this class is to understand that we are all kind of going through this together. This is a new experience for every single one of us to be teaching this way and interacting this way. Now, the class is designed so that every assignment builds on itself. So you write 3 5-page essays throughout the quarter, and each of these essays will be worth 20% of your final grade, and the final exam in the class will then count for the rest of your grade. Now, the important thing about these essays is you will have the same question for each of those essays. The only difference is that the first essay will work on materials from the first quarter of the class, the first part of the class, Roman political biography. The second will look at Roman religious biography, and the third will look at Christian Roman biography. But the goal in this is for you to understand, by working on the same sorts of texts, the same sorts of materials with the same question, you will begin to become much more comfortable working through these particular texts and understanding how they work and how they make their arguments. And so the idea in the class that we have is that these assignments will build on each other. And so if you find challenges with the first assignment, you have the opportunity to read the comments that your TA provides you and incorporate those comments into the second and third papers as you work through them. But because you're working on these materials, you will get better working on them. All of these biographies share common structure. That's the great advantage to these texts. And because they share this common structure, and because you're being asked to consider them in the same way across the entire quarter, you will become very good at this. And if you put in the work and you incorporate the comments you get from your TAs, you will succeed in this. This is a course that is designed to help you succeed. So for the next time, what I would ask that you do is read through the assigned portions of Virgil's Aeneid. This is books 1 through 4. In this lecture, what we will talk about is primarily the ways in which a biography presents an argument about the nature of the person, but the Aeneid sections will help us understand one particular element of them. So please prepare the Aeneid sections before you listen to the next lecture. Thank you.